Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I know some of you know me. My name is Don Lindell. And Graham Pritchard and I are both active pilots. We both own airplanes currently. And a little over a year ago, we got together and said, you know, we ought to put some programs together on aviation that people might be interested in. And if you remember last spring, Graham made a wonderful presentation about the C-140s and the trip that he commanded down to the Antarctica. That was really fascinating. Many of you attend that?
Yes.
Yeah, quite a few, I thought so. So, anyway, after that, we said, what's the next thing we could do? And what we did was we arranged for tours of the control tower out at the airport. And we took 2 busloads out there. We went up into the tower, and they were able to watch them control the aircraft taxiing around the airport and doing takeoff and landings, and talk to the controllers as to how they operated and watched all their equipment. So, pretty interesting program. Then, this is the third one of the event, and this is where Graham is going to talk about the World War II pilots and their airplanes. And then we have one more we're going to plan to do, probably after the holidays when everybody gets settled down a little bit. I'll tell you what it is. What we're going to do is, we thought, out at the airport, we have our airplanes in hangars right next door to each other. And adjacent to that is a classroom. We thought, well, we'll invite people to mount. Well, we can arrange a bus to come out there. Go into the classroom, and we'll explain to you the difference between our airplanes, because there's completely different types of airplane. And just see if you realize how different they are. And we'd explain to you about the airplane, and then we'll have them out of the hangar on the ramp. And you can walk out, touch them, look at them, ask questions, and we'll be there to answer and even brief you on what the airplanes are and the differences between them. So we'll do that sometime after the holiday. On the back, as you go out the door, there's a sheet where you can put down your name, your phone, and email, and so forth. Where you're at, so we know how many people are interested in it that we can contact and do that. So if you're interested in something like that, please put your name on there as you go out tonight. Okay? Graham Pritchard is a very active pilot. He's a veteran Air Force pilot. And he's going to be able to tell us all about the World War II pilots and all of their airplanes. Okay?
The paper right behind you.
You can drop something.
Oh. That's why I didn't know what to say about Graham. I was written on there. Yeah. Anyway, he has a lot of flying experience, and he can tell us a lot about these veteran pilots.
Oh, hi everyone. Hi. Thanks for coming out tonight. Yeah, good to see you all tonight. And we have some special guests tonight. Yeah, I'd like to introduce these folks to you. The special guest tonight, Miss Ruth Wakeland. Mrs. Ruth Wakeland, her daughter Connie. Mr. David Miller, his son Tom and wife Deb, and Mr. Philip Moyer. They're our special guests tonight. So we're going to hear a little bit more about these folks tonight. I think you'll enjoy hearing about some of their life experiences. Well, a tough mission today. We were up on the Humboldt Glacier. It was kind of warm. The snow was a little soft. We had to pick up a science team and leave a fuel cache for next season. But I'm going to talk to you tonight about some fellows that flew some really tough missions. I'm talking about the folks who flew in World War II. There were thousands of young men who came forward to learn to fly and to serve during the war. Many women also became qualified in the same airplanes and flew those same airplanes in various support roles. In fact, we have a couple of residents here, right here in the East, or in our States community, that flew during World War II.
Your microphone working?
I hope so. I'll try to speak up a little bit. It's a lavalier mic, and sometimes it doesn't pick up well, so I'll try to speak up a little bit more. It's as much as we can get on it. So thank you, Tom. I'll try to speak up a little bit more. There we go. That works. So, but during my tenure here, I've gotten to know 3 individuals who were pilots in World War II. I've learned something about their experiences in the war, and I've asked them if they would share some of those with me so I can in turn share them with you all. The 3 fellows that I've met and gotten to know here, John Wakeland, David Miller, and Philip Moyer. Now this is kind of a bittersweet night for Ruth and Connie in that John passed away 2 years ago on Veterans Day. But they're glad to be here and they're glad to share in their life experiences as we talk about John's experiences as well. December 7th, 1941. What did President Roosevelt call it? The day that would live in infamy. Well, that was the day that started it. And in the days and weeks and months that followed, literally thousands of young men would come forward to serve and to volunteer. Some of those young men had their eyes on the sky. They wanted to fly. And so they joined the Aviation Cadet Training Program. As they were accepted into that program, their training that they would undergo went into 5 phases. Pre-flight, primary, basic, advanced, and transition. Plus a little bit of college courses in there as well. Phil took his college courses at Wofford. Anybody know where Wofford is? Come on, somebody knows where Wofford College is. Spartanburg, South Carolina. Don't we have any Carolina folks here? All right. Phil spent some time at Wofford on his college courses. So this is the steps that they were going to go through in their training, and each phase would be in a different place. They were going to hop back and forth across the country, set up housekeeping, train for 2 months, and move on to someplace else. So pre-flight training involved starting to learn the thing that all Army members must learn. Whether you're going to fly airplanes or not, you've got to learn to march, right? So up 2, 3, 4, the first thing they learned was to march. Then we have to have good physical training. So they go into the physical training. This is at Maxwell Air Force Base. It is still today. That's where Phil was for his physical training, for his pre-flight. Phil might be in that picture somewhere. I don't know. I couldn't pick one out from another, I don't think. Anybody recognize Phil in that picture? But he was at Maxwell. He was there doing his calisthenics along with the rest of the guys. What else do you have to learn? Well, you got to learn to shoot. Now that's what? That's a 45, right? Isn't that what the guy shot? I suspect that not too far from there must be a barn door, because they all told me that you can only hit a barn door. You can't even hit a barn door with a 45, right? Am I right? You can't even hit the barn door with a 45. Phil confirms that. So yeah, they had to learn to shoot. So I'm sure that barn door target was just a little ways out there. Now they've got to learn something about the physiology of flying. What happens when you go to altitude? How does your body react? What are your symptoms of hypoxia, the lack of oxygen, going to be? So the altitude chamber is a device where they pump the air out, simulate a high altitude to see how you react to that and what your symptoms are. Also, learn how to use your oxygen equipment. They're all going to be flying high altitude missions. They need to know how the oxygen system works and how to use it. And of course, we all have to know how to do Morse code. Yeah, we're pilots, we got a radio man in the air. How come we have to learn Morse code? You have to be able to transcribe. How many words a minute did you have to transcribe? Do you remember that, guys? I did it in my pilot training. Tom did too, right? So you still have to learn Morse code. Finally, we get towards something that kind of looks like an airplane. Well, not really too much like an airplane. It does have a stick. It does have rudder pedals. So, but yeah, we're starting to learn some things about the stick and the rudder of an airplane and how they work. Well, When pre-flight is done, we're going to be moving on to primary training. Now, primary training was done with civilian instructors in the very basic and simple training airplanes. The PT 17, 19, 22, and 23. Each of our young pilots is going to get a different airplane for their primary training. They're going to learn the fundamentals of flight, takeoffs and landings, that first solo flight, which every pilot remembers, map reading and cross country, and aerobatic maneuvers and spins. Very early in the training program, we do these kinds of things. So John's going to get himself a PT-17 Stearman, known as the Stearman, an old biplane, open cockpit biplane trainer. It had been the primary training for the Army Air Corps for some period of time. John would draw the Stearman as his airplane for training. Thousands were built, and quite a number of them have been restored and are still flying today. I've had the privilege of flying a Stearman just a few hours to recognize its qualities as a training airplane. So the young pilots would catch up with their instructor, and they would team up and start flying that Stearman and learning about the basics of flying. Now David would draw PT-19 as his primary trainer. Yes, that's David up on the wing of his PT-19 getting ready to go out for a flight. The PT-19 was a low-wing monoplane designed for training, once again, in the Army Air Forces of that time. Now, Phil would go off to Lafayette, Louisiana for his training, and he would be flying a variant of the same airframe, but with a different engine. His had a radial engine on it, so it was designated the PT-23. Phil liked his PT-23, said it was a great little aerobatic airplane. He loved doing aerobatics and spins and the PT-23. It was a simple airplane. Didn't have a whole lot of instruments. What do you need to know? Well, what direction am I traveling? How fast am I going? What's my altitude? And how's my engine running? And that was about it. That's all you needed to know. Yeah, that's the basics. Oh, you got that little one in the middle. That's called a turn coordinator or turn and slip. The little needle at the top would tell you if you were turning in one direction or the other. And the little ball in the bottom of it there would say whether your longitudinal axis was properly aligned. Instructors got really upset if that ball was off to one side or the other, and they would let you know very quickly to step on the ball. When you put your foot on the rudder pedal on that side, that would bring the ball back to center. So basic, pretty simple airplanes at the time. But there was one thing they did have to master, a complex part of the airplane, the mysteries of the Gosport. You might know what a Gosport is? Well, there was no radios in these airplanes, so how does the instructor and pilot communicate? Well, there's a tube with two cones on either end, so one guy talks, the other guy listens, you know? And then you go it the other way around, you know? So a really complex piece of equipment. They all were equipped with Gosport, so you had to learn to use the Gosport. Well, things continued, and it's time to graduate and move on to basic training. Basic training, they'll now be working with regular Air Force instructors, Army Air Force instructors. They'll be in a couple different airplanes, either the BT-9 or the 13. These airplanes are a little bit more complex, and they'll be beginning to move into more complex maneuvers and tactics. All three of our young pilots are going to draw time in the Vultee Vibrator, as they called it. They had their own name for it. None of the three had much good to say about the Vultee Vibrator. But they learned what they needed to learn in it. It was a good training airplane for its purposes, for where they were in their training. And one of the things they had to learn was formation flying. Now, pilots who are going to fly formation, they have to know how to use their hands, because they're going to have to put their hands like this and do stuff like that, right? So you have to be able to talk with your hands if you're going to fly formation. And sure enough, the instructor's showing them how to talk with their hands, how to get in that right position for flying formation. And after a little bit of training in their Vultee Vibrator, they were flying good fingertip formation and doing a fine job of it. Well, things continue on in their training. They are finishing up basic, so now they need to consider what they're going to be doing for advanced training. And on graduation from the basic, they get their assignments on the airplane they're going to fly in combat, their operational airplane, and they're going to get the training airplane advanced that matches that. Oh yeah, that's David in the middle. Yeah, on graduation. Yeah, anybody recognize David in that? Yeah, that's him in the middle.
Looks just like it.
Looks just like it, doesn't it? Yeah, that's yeah. And so he learned that he was going to be flying the B-26, as noted right there. Well, when you get on to advanced training, now you're going to branch out for either single or multi-engine training. The single engine guys will be flying the T6 Texan, a great training airplane. The multi-engine guys will be flying one of several different types of multi-engine trainers. The T6 was a great training airplane, very good airplane, and many of them have been restored and are still flying today. I've had a chance to fly one of those briefly as well, great training airplane. But all three of our guys are going to be flying multi-engines. So we need to get into multi-engine training. So John and David draw a funny little airplane, the 18-9 Fledgling. Kind of a different looking little airplane, a multi-engine airplane, but with just a two-person cockpit. It was a bit of a challenging airplane to fly on purpose because the P38 and the B-26 that these two pilots will be flying was a very challenging multi-engine airplanes. So the BT-18-9 Fledgling, or as they referred to it, they called it the Jeep, was an excellent training airplane for the airplanes that they were going to be moving on to and flying. The 18-9 Cockpit, a little more complex than the old cockpits of the primary trainers, two-place for the pilot and the instructor, and learning the complexities of multi-engine operations. More complex airplanes, but also single engine. You know, multi-engine airplanes are great until one of the engine quits. Now you've got a single engine airplane that doesn't fly so good. We'll talk a little bit more about that as we go along, but that's something they had to learn. Phil would go on to Stuttgart on the airfield in Arkansas to fly the AT-10 Wichita. It was a Beechcraft aircraft, a twin. Now one of the unique things about this one and its first cousin, the Cessna Bobcat, is that most of the structure of the airplane was made of wood. That would preserve the materials that they needed for the combat airplanes. The aluminum and the other materials would be used in our combat airplanes, and these training airplanes would be largely the fuselage, control surfaces and all would all be wood. Well, finally that day comes when they've earned their wings, the penny, if you will. The much coveted Air Force wings. Those who have earned it are rightfully proud of those wings. There's not that many that have earned it, and of course, David was very proud of his, rightfully so, of his wing. David, that's you up there with your brand new wings. That's you. Yes, sir, it is. With those brand new shiny wings. Well, now that they're officially Air Force pilots, it's time to move on to the airplanes that they're going to be flying operationally and training those. The transition training now takes them into airplanes that are actually going to fly. John will be flying the P38 Lightning, a new airplane built by Lockheed. David will be flying his B-26, and Philip drew the B-17 as his airplane that he would fly operationally, Flying Fortress. P-38 Lightning was an interesting airplane. John will go off to Williams Field in Arizona to fly the P-38. You can tell it's a little bit unique. It's a twin-engine airplane. You can see that the engines are mounted on a boom there. And this pilot was in the center there with and the center pod of the airplane. A unique design. And anytime you come up with a brand new design, sometimes you come up with some problems. And there were a few problems with the early Lightnings, but they were resolved. And one of the unique things about it was the engine. The engine was an Allison D1710 1,000 horsepower engine, but most of the old airplanes at that time had the big radial engines, which had a big area to get through the air. These were sleek, and it made it for a very fast airplane, 400-mile-an-hour plus airplane. It had tricycle landing gear, which was something relatively new versus conventional gear. 4 50 caliber machine guns and 2 20-millimeter cannon. A lot of firepower. So John was training in the P38, finished his training, and he went on to be assigned to the 338 Fighter Squadron in Wormingford, England. There's young John with his P38 over in England. Wormingford was one of the typical RAF bases in the southern part of England. Multiple runways and revetments all around the outside of the airfield, so that the airplanes would be all parked out here, had them dispersed. So if the enemy came over with bombing the airfield, if the airplanes were all concentrated on a nice straight line, it would take them all out. So they had them distributed around the field for safety from enemy bombing. Well, John learned early on that if you're going to be a successful military pilot, you have to have a good relationship with your maintenance guys. It appears from this picture that John did have that kind of relationship, and they did a fine job of maintaining his P-38. Well, John flew a bunch of missions in the P-38. He's coming back from one of his missions one day, and he's looking down at the field there at Wormingford, and he sees a whole row of these brand new different airplanes. A whole row of P-51 Mustangs. Well, the Air Force decided, the Army Air Force decided it's time for these boys to transition to the P-51, which would be a more effective airplane for accompanying the bombers on their bombing missions to Germany. So they were delivered. 1 week later, John is up flying operational missions in his very own P-51, which he nicknamed Ruthless Rufus. Now, I have yet to figure out what that means. Ruth hasn't shared that with me, what that means.
I don't know either.
So she says she doesn't know either. I think she knows, but she's just not willing to say what Ruthless stood for exactly. But anyway, that was John's airplane, and that's the one he would fly as he continued flying his missions. Even though John loved his P-38, in his memoirs, which he has written a wonderful memoir of his experiences, he did acknowledge that the P-51 was a fabulous plane. Well, now David's going to be going out to do his training in the B-26 Marauder. He's going over to Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana. The B-26, another relatively new airplane for a medium bomber, a very slick airplane, a very fast airplane, and a relatively new model, once again, built by Martin. And a challenging airplane to learn. It was equipped with big engines, some big Pratt & Whitney R2800 engines at 2,000 horsepower each, had a 6-man crew, and another challenging airplane to learn to fly. Now, he did his flying out at Barksdale. They also flew these out of MacDill Air Force Base over here in Tampa. Because they had a lot of problems in training, they had a little saying over there at MacDill Air Force Base, one a day in Tampa Bay. And, but they overcame the training problems that they were experiencing, they did some improvements in the airplane, and it proved to be a very, very effective airplane for the mission. A little different perspective. We don't get to look at them kind of right in the nose there, but there's some of our crew members up there in the front of the cockpit and down in the bubble in the front. I think the guy in front's having a cigarette, if I'm not mistaken. Is that? I think he's smoking a cigarette, having a little cigarette break up in the nose of the B-26. Well, there's David's crew, finished up their training, getting ready to head overseas for their missions and for their assignments overseas. David would go over and become a member of the 387th Bomb Group, the 559th Squadron. This is a silhouette of their airplane. This hash marks up here was the hash marks that represented the bomb group. And then the little red paint on the spinner was for his squadron, the 559th Squadron. And their little symbol was a really smart-looking frog there, hiding a bomb behind him. I think he's thinking about what he's going to do with that bomb. But David would go on to have him fly out of England, France, and Holland during his time over the war. As I said, Phil's going to get into B-17. He's going to be in Kearney, Nebraska, and Langley, Virginia for his training. The venerable B-17, which has been really immortalized in a couple of movies, 12 O'Clock High and The Memphis Belle. Any pilot hears on TV that 12 O'Clock High is going to be shown, we always look at it one more time. It doesn't matter how many times you see it, if you watch it again, with further regret. Well, the B-17 was quite an airplane. Look at the wingspan on this airplane. This is a big airplane. Equipped with the Wright Cyclone R-1870s, about 1,200 horsepower each, and a 9-man crew. So it was quite an airplane. Big old wings. Mission was precision bombing. And one of the problems with precision bombing, if you're going to be very precise, you have to make your bomb run nice and straight and level to your bomb site. What's the worst thing you can do in aerial combat? Fly straight and level. You put yourself in exposure to the enemy anti-aircraft and enemy fighters, but it's what they had to do. So in order to protect themselves, they flew their airplanes in big formations, so that all those gunners on all those airplanes could mutually support each other. And of course, if they had the fighter escort that could take them all the way to the target, that's good. Some of the early fighters couldn't go all the way to the target location, so they were on their own. But the B-17 was, I say, his buddies up in England in the 8th Air Force were living in the lap of luxury. They didn't have it so good down at Tortorella. They lived in tents. In fact, these are some of Phil's crewmates.
No, they're officers. They're all officers.
Oh, this is officer. This is officer.
The middle is my radar bombardier.
All right. Phil is telling you exactly the names of these fellows here that were on his crew, and they lived in tents. Even the operations building didn't have much going for it. It was an old farmhouse or something, a farm building or something, and that's where the operations were. So Phil liked to say, hey, we had it tough. We had it tough down there in Italy.
We bombed all the oil though. We saved a lot of lives.
He said their missions were, many of them were the oil refineries up in Poland and what was doing in that area there. The B-17 was known for its ability to take a lot of damage and still keep flying. This is one of the group airplanes. The whole side of the airplane is blown away and it's still flying, and it brought the crew back home again. So it was famous for its ability just to take a tremendous amount of punishment and still bring the crews home.
There's a little diagram underneath that picture. Actually, I was flying bombs were just about to go away, and I was flying directly underneath. So I saw the 88 shell go up, and
Bill was saying he was flying in formation just below this airplane. He saw the 88 shell that went up and did damage to the preceding airplane of his. He saw this damage take place on his mission. Well, during that time, the crews had a certain number of missions that they were required to do, and when they had finished the number of missions they were required, they were able to go home. There would be so much to talk about the missions that these guys flew. Some of them were relatively low risk. They would call those milk runs. Others were very, very difficult, very challenging, and in many cases, many of their squadron mates did not return from those flights. But due to, I'm sure, good piloting and good fortune, all three of our pilots would complete their missions and come back to the States. Once they came back, it wasn't very long before the war was over. Peace was declared, and it's over. So what now for our young pilots? Well, they all were interested in perhaps continuing their military careers, but options were very limited for them. There were so many military members that were interested in that. So they decided they're going to look at other options for their lives and careers. Education opportunities with the GI Bill. They all went on to earn their college degrees and beyond. They started their careers in their business ventures in sales, publishing, engineering, and architecture. So our young pilots refocused themselves now, having survived and completed their wartime service, to their careers. But there was something else on their mind as well. What do you think might have been on their mind besides education and careers? What do you think? Girls, the girls who waited back home for them. Guy and Ruth would be married November the 18th, 1944, at their family home that's in Illinois, is that?
Illinois.
In Illinois. This is at their family home in Illinois, shortly after his return. Well, time went on, and life goes on, and the years pass. And as the years pass, things happen, and the families grow. And sure enough, some number of years later, we get the Wakeland family together again, and that's what they look like. And looks like they're having a little fun there too. Those grandkids are really something, aren't they? Gotta love your grandkids showing off for the picture. Well, young David wasn't far behind. A couple years later, he and Beverly tied the knot, and sure enough, same thing happened again. The family would grow, and there would be the boys and girls of the Miller family. And Tom, you're which one?
Center.
That's you.
Yes.
And there's Tom right there in the center. Are you the senior?
This was their 50th wedding anniversary party.
50th wedding anniversary party. You remember that? Are you the oldest of the boys?
I am.
You're, okay. Tom's the oldest of the boys. Yeah. Stella, many of you have met Stella. She spent a couple of months here helping David out a couple of months ago. She would love to have been here today. But, and the girls are twins, right?
Yes.
Yeah, the girls are twins. So there's the Miller, and all three boys have served in the service.
All retired.
All retired from the service as well. So that's something to be said. Well, Phil kind of had the same idea, but he's a little slow on the uptake. It took him a couple of years. But I want to say something about this picture of Beverly. It's a little creased and a little crinkled. That's because that's the picture that Phil carried with him on all 35 of his B-17 missions when he was flying. So that one served its purpose next to his heart, a little creased and a little crinkled, but sure enough, another family would grow. And they're having some fun too, I think. Three wonderful families, three men who served their country with great distinction, went on with successful careers and wonderful families. There was a RAF pilot who captured kind of the thought of a military pilot. He was an RAF pilot, flew Spitfires, and was killed in an accident in the early days of the war. But he was a poet as well. And he wrote a poem that really, I think, captured the feelings and the thoughts of our military pilots. I'd like to recite that for you. Oh, I have swift the surly bonds of earth and danced the skies on laughter-silvered wings. Sunward I've climbed and joined the tumbling mirth of sun-split clouds and done 100 things you have not dreamed of. Wheeled and soared and swung high in the sunlit silence. Hovering there, I've chased the shouting wind along and flown my eager craft through footless halls of air. Up Up the long, delirious, burning blue, I've topped the windswept heights with easy grace, where never lark or even eagle flew. And wild, with silent lifting mind, I've trod the high, untrespassed sanctity of space, put out my hand, and touched the face of God. I think he captured feelings of our military pilots. Well, tomorrow's another day. We have another mission. Jim Wilbur and I have to go over to Kulasuk and pick up some equipment, take it up to the summit camp. But before we do that, I would like for all of you to join me in recognizing, remembering all those who served, remembering those who returned, those who did not return, and those we said goodbye to in the years intervening. And I'd also like to have you recognize our guests of honor and these gentlemen who served.
Thank you, Graham. That was tremendous. I knew these guys before, but I didn't realize all that. I knew you both pilot and flew, but I didn't realize all that background. I was really fascinated with that. So, very interesting. I want to remind you that if you want to do this after the holidays, go and look at our airplanes, Graham's and my airplane. They're completely different airplanes, and we'll tell you all about it. There's a sheet right at the table as you go out. You put your name down there and so forth. Then we'll get in touch with you when we figure out a date and exactly what we're going to do it. We can arrange a bus to go for those who would like to go out and do that. So, with that, any questions that you want to propose to Graham or to our pilots? No? Okay. Well, thank you very much for coming.
Sneaking over modestly.